Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have three questions I want to dive into. So let's dive into them. So my first question of the week was minimizing tips on minimizing joint stress. And so again, I'm going to assume this is from a weightlifting perspective again. So I am going to take it through that lens of weight training. Again, other types of training. Again, we can work on minimizing joint stress, but I would imagine there's a large overlap, right, in terms of what we would do here for minimizing joint stress for weight training versus say you were doing a lot of running or whatever that may be there. And actually, I want to add one more to my list here that I want to go over. I guess that falls under programming. All right. So anyways, so first is going to be our technique. So technique is going to be the first thing that we want to look at. We want to make sure that is dialed in. And actually, sorry, let me actually just backtrack on this real quick. I think in general, if we're looking at building muscle, and there's different levels to this, right? You have someone who maybe they just want to build a little bit of muscle. You have someone who wants to build a little bit more. And then you have people that have really high expectations of what to do or how far they want to go with it. And I think at the end of the day, no matter what, you're going to have some form of like fatigue and like some form of maybe some small kind of injuries and stuff like that along the way. Obviously, the trick is going to be making sure it doesn't get crazy to where you have to have some type of surgery or it causes you to miss out on, say, months of not being able to train. So we obviously don't want to do that. But in saying that, if we're trying to progress, I don't think you're necessarily going to feel absolutely amazing all the time. I think anytime somebody like feels any sort of like small little, like, I guess the best word described is a niggle. I've heard some people be like, that's a weird thing to say, but again, a niggle, something just small like that, right? Like maybe a little bit of tendonitis, whatever it may be. Maybe you just like slightly strained a muscle or something like that. I just think that along the way of pushing, we are going to feel like you're never going to feel perfect. It's going to be the cost of doing business. If you're someone who you don't really care too much about building muscle and you're okay with maybe not having like you again, it's low on your priority list. Well, then maybe for you, you don't necessarily need to worry about this. But I think if you want to go past that to where it's like, hey, you want to look like you lift and you put the time into it, that's going to involve you pushing it more times than not, or at least for periods of time. And again, I just think you're not going to feel great in that process. Your body is going to have a little bit of wear and tear with it. If we look at like athletes, a lot of people think athletes are in like perfect health, but and their body feels great and everything like that. But pushing beyond and trying to change your body and athletes in general, like there's going to be a lot of wear and tear on the body, and it's not necessarily like the healthiest thing long term for your body. Okay, so that's the main thing I'm just trying to the main point I'm trying to make here with this part before I dive into these things is, again, we don't want to stress so much about having, like, yes, we obviously want to minimize it, but I think it's okay if there's a little bit of that along the way. Again, people are overly scared of that, and anytime they feel a little bit of anything, like, oh my gosh, I'm doing too much, or now I need to back off, and then this leads to them not really actually making progress because they're so worried about that. Now, for you, if feeling absolutely perfect and not having any of this is your goal, and that is more important to you than really changing your body, then again, maybe that's okay too, right? There's nothing wrong with that. You obviously have that choice. And again, our goal is to make sure that we reduce that as much as possible in this process, right? So I don't also want it to be like, oh, hey, it doesn't matter. Don't listen to your body. You're going to be in pain. Like you need to feel that way. Again, that's also not the case, but it is finding that happy medium there with that. So anyways, and the same thing goes with like fatigue, right? People are like so worried about fatigue or, hey, how do I keep fatigue as low as possible? And it's look, if you're trying to progress, that's going to be the cost of doing business. Same thing with like fat loss dieting. People are like, they don't want to have any hunger, but that's the cost of doing business. You have to do that in order to get to where you want to go. So again, same kind of thing here with joint stress. But again, how can we minimize it? What are some things that are going to be like, just if we, there's things that we can easily overlook that can lead to unnecessary joint stress potentially. And again, obviously first is going to be technique. Technique's going to be high on the priority list here. We want to make sure we're lifting with good technique. When it comes to hypertrophy, we don't necessarily need to have this absolutely picture perfect technique to where same thing that I talked about, if we're just always trying to avoid any sort of discomfort or pain at all when it comes to our training, you're probably going to be missing out on progress. Same thing with technique. If you're overly focused on technique, you're probably not really pushing yourself as hard as you could, but pushing yourself, letting your technique suffer too much in terms just to do more weight or to progressively overload, that's where you may run into some issues there, right? Again, we want to have acceptable technique. And again, I think some good rules of thumb are you want to control the eccentric, the lowering portion of it. You want to make sure that you're you're slowly progressing your weight up versus just being like, you know what, hey, just slap another 45 pounds on each side there, right? So we want to control the weight. And then for whatever exercise we're doing, we're just making sure that we're not having too much momentum and swaying our body. Again, I think a little bit of that is fine. You don't have to have this, like I said, picture perfect technique. But again, if we are doing high volumes with suboptimal technique, that is something that I think over time will start to obviously impact your joints and put unnecessary stress on those joints. But again, it's also going to be dependent on a few of these other things that I want to talk about too. But I think the simple thing we can do is have some focus on your technique and have some way to make sure that you're progressing that technique over time. And again, I give you some tips on how to do that. Next, we have training intensity. So like how close we get to failure, because again, we're talking more about building muscle here. And so again, we want to look out for our intensity. We probably don't want to necessarily always be at zero RAR on something or on most of our lifts. Again, maybe more isolation types stuff you can, but for a lot of our lifts, we probably want to keep a couple reps in the tank. The closer we get to failure, you may start to find that you put a little bit, your technique might suffer just a little bit. And so again, this comes back to technique. If we can maintain some sort of good technique, we can probably push the intensity up a bit more. Whereas if we're lifting with poor technique and then we also have poor intensity or high intensity, that's where you're going to start to see some more unnecessary stress on your joints there. So again, we want to look at intensity there, and also intensity in terms of adding weight to the bar. So intensity in terms of how close you get to failure, but also how much weight you put on the bar. Again, I think the big thing there is going to be making sure that you slowly progress versus, like I said, not just being like, you know what, hey, just throw another 45 on each side. Then we also have volume. So again, same thing with volume. We want to make sure that we're doing an amount that we can recover from. We're not doing too much training volume without, again, if we have poor technique with that, if our intensity is super high with that, and we also do high amounts of volume, that's where you're going to start to run into some issues. So again, the key would be to find the right amount of volume for you, but then also if you are going to do more volume, slowly increase that volume versus just being like, hey, you know what, I'm doing 8 sets. Now I'm going to go up to 15, right? We want to slowly ramp it up. It'd be better to go up from 8 to 9 to 10 versus going up to 15. Next thing we want to look at is your overall exercise selection and just your overall programming. So exercise selection being choosing exercises that fit you well and that don't cause you joint discomfort. Again, it could be a technique type thing. Who knows? Maybe your body just doesn't sit well with that exercise. So it doesn't make sense to continue to hammer in that exercise. Exercise selection also being avoiding any like redundant exercises and doing too much of those, right? Again, I think that's a big mistake people make where it's like, let's say for chest, they're doing an incline chest press machine, then they're doing incline dumbbell press, and they're doing incline cable press, and they're just doing the same type of movement over and over again, just different like machines, right? So again, something better would be like for your chest training, you're going to do some sort of pressing movement that hits your upper chest, right? So something that goes from low to high. Then you're going to do something that is maybe a little bit more straight, like a flat type press, and then you're going to do something that's a little bit more like high to low, or you're going to throw in some sort of fly at a different kind of arm path, right? So then that way it's like you're hitting chest, but you're hitting different parts of your chest and different types of movement within that. So you're not doing redundant exercises, because that can be something that can impact joint stress if we're again hitting it in the same way, just different like machines or cables or whatever it may be there, or again, yeah, dumbbells to barbells. And then just your overall programming, making sure you do have smart programming. And again, this all comes back into probably all these things that I just talked about. And then again, we also want to probably vary exercises and modalities. And so what I mean by varying exercises is you don't want to necessarily change an exercise every week, right? But sticking with something for 6 to 8 weeks, reevaluating, see how it's going. And then at some point you're switching it up, right? Whether that be, again, the modality, whether maybe you're going from a dumbbell press to a cable press, or you're doing a incline to a low incline, right? Something you're just like making small kind of changes and you're varying these exercises over time as well too. So making sure you do that can be a great way to minimize joint stress versus doing, hey, I have to do back squat. So you do back squat you've been doing it for the last 10 years. And then utilizing different modalities. So again, utilizing dumbbells, cables, machines, barbells. Like that's a cool thing with muscle growth is we have a lot of flexibility that we can build in here. And again, I think if we can do these things with part of building muscles, it takes a lot of time and can get boring. The type of training that you need to do to build muscle can get boring over time. So the trick is finding these small changes that you can make to keep it interesting. And again, changing modalities can be a thing there that helps with that. And then So those are the things within your training that you can do with that. And then outside, we have our nutrition and recovery, right? So again, managing your stress. Obviously, if you're under a lot of stress and you're just constantly in this sympathetic, just fight or flight state, that is going to hurt your recovery. You may feel a little bit more inflamed. Again, you're just going to be under recovered. It's going to take you longer to recover in between training sessions, and that's going to be something that impacts your joint health. Sleep, again, sleep is going to help with the recovery. So again, we want to make sure we get good sleep. We want to prioritize sleep. Prioritize sleep like you prioritize your workouts. And then nutrition. Nutrition is going to be helpful in terms of making sure that we're getting enough protein. We're eating a diet that has some whole foods in it, some like anti-inflammatory type foods. That's going to be super important, right? So again, we want to make sure we do that, right? Making sure that we have a good kind of, variety in our diet there. And then from a supplementation standpoint, taking creatine can help. Fish oil can be super helpful. Magnesium, good multivitamin. So again, making sure we also supplement with those things. If you do those things, you're really going to minimize joint stress, and you will keep your body feeling good there. And then again, too, I guess one thing I didn't mention and this goes into the programming, is rep ranges. I don't think you necessarily need to train in the same rep range all the time. So if you have always trained, say, at the 5 to 8 or 6 to 10 rep range, again, maybe vary that up a little bit. I know there's some people that say, hey, that's the only rep range you want to train in, but look, we can, from a hypertrophy standpoint, we can vary that up. Again, maybe as you get higher and higher in rep ranges, may not be the greatest in terms of the best bang for your buck in terms of hypertrophy, but you can still get it done, and it can be helpful on your joints potentially as well too. Those would be the things I would do to minimize joint stress there. All right, so second question of the day is, if I overeat protein while managing calories, will that slow weight loss? And quick kind of answer to this is no. As long as you're managing your calories, it will not slow weight loss. So again, if calories in, calories out is still going to be our thing that's going to manipulate your body weight up, down, or keeping it the same. Okay. And once you start to see a trend in a certain way, that will tell you the energy balance you're in, no matter, again, if you're tracking X amount of calories or whatever it may be. At the end of the day, if your body weight has a trend over multiple weeks on end of where it's going, I'm not talking, hey, you weigh in on Monday and then Wednesday it's up 2 pounds that you're in surplus. It's, hey, trends over 2 to 3 weeks, taking your average weight under the same conditions. If there's a trend in that, that's going to tell you the energy balance you're in. Again, no matter what you think you're doing there. So if our weight loss is slowing, and again, I'm going to tie this in because this is actually a question from a client. I'm going to tie this into this client specifically, but if your weight loss is slowing, it wouldn't be the protein, right? Because again, calories are going to be the number one thing. So if you're hitting your caloric amount, but you're getting more protein than you typically do, like that shouldn't slow weight loss. Now, what it could potentially do is, one, if you're coming from lower protein and now you're eating more protein, I think the first thing that could happen is you could be building some muscle. Again, it's never going to be this one-to-one. People overestimate, oh, hey, I'm not dropping weight like I want. It's just because I'm building a ton of muscle. Again, it doesn't happen like that, unfortunately. But it could be masking some of that weight loss potentially, especially if like training was off, or again, like you were eating low protein before. Protein also is usually going to be higher food volume type stuff. And so again, it could be that you're just have more food in your system at any one time. And usually protein leads towards, as a whole, just a higher diet quality when you really focus on high protein. Again, you cut out a lot of the crap in your diet by eating higher protein. So again, it could be a higher food volume type thing. So that could be what's going on. But at the end of the day, the cool thing with protein is it's gonna be really hard to, if you're gonna overeat a macro, protein's gonna be the one to do that, right? It's a lot harder to store protein as body fat in general. But then on top of it, protein has the highest thermic effect of food, meaning it uses the most energy to absorb and digest. If you increase your protein intake, you will, depending on where you come from, you will see a small increase. You should see a small increase in your total daily energy expenditure, right? If anything, protein is going to be one of those things that could increase your total daily energy expenditure, again, making it that you can eat more calories and still maintain weight or lose weight there. Again, protein's not going to be the reason you are slowing your weight loss. Now, with this specific client, because I want to tie this in because he asked me this, for him, I think the big thing is just this over reliance on the scale and like overlooking what the scale says. Because for him, he saw this big decrease he was at maintenance, then went to into a fat loss phase. And he saw this big decrease in scale weight. And again, usually when that happens, it's water weight, right? You got a little bit of bloat. You decrease the amount of food you have. So you have less food in your body at any one time. You're probably eating lower carbohydrates. So glycogen storage goes down a little bit. All these things lead to the first week or two from going from a maintenance phase or a surplus to a deficit. a pretty large decrease in body weight. And again, it's water weight usually, right? So you see that, and then you think that's what's going to happen week over week. So you see this like big drop the first week in most cases. And again, that's not all body fat. Some of it's water weight, but it's a good sign that things are heading in the right direction. And then from there, so then people think that like their weight loss is slowing down and they're doing something wrong, when really it's just, again, that you got that nice initial whoosh effect of water weight. And then now it's going to be more tissue loss, which in turn is going to lead to slower weight loss on the scale, right? So for him, that was the big thing. And then also he was just not looking at his average weight, right? He was looking at just daily weigh-ins. Hey, I was 185 this day, then I was 186.2. And so you think you're at a slower weight loss, but when I looked at his average weight, it was trending down. So again, this is where we have to step back and look at that. So that was his specific case in terms of what was happening there with that. So again, I think the takeaway with this, if you are going to overeat a macro, it's going to be protein. And again, if you are managing your calories, the macro breakdown from a weight standpoint, not necessarily a body composition standpoint, from a weight standpoint, will not slow weight loss if you're managing your calories over time. Because again, in the short term, there's going to be some water weight fluctuations with carbohydrates and things like that. So again, my takeaway with this is we have to zoom out and look at where the trends are going from a weight perspective. And that's going to tell you the energy balance here and not this day-to-day change. Oh, hey, I was 185 yesterday. Now I'm 186. What's going on? Why am I going backwards? You're not going backwards. It's freaking water weight. Anyways, you can tell that that's a common thing that I hear. Anyways, all right. So I haven't progressed in a few weeks in the gym, what to do. And so what I want to do with this is just go over why your performance may decrease in your training sessions, because this is another common thing I see of like people either worry about, okay, one day they didn't progress, or from one week to the next, they didn't progress. So first look at what does it mean you haven't progressed, or you haven't progressed in like weight, or what's telling you haven't progressed. So what I'm going to do with this is, hey, look at these things and see if they have been off the last couple weeks and in the short term as well too, right? So we're going to look at this from a couple weeks of performance plateauing and acutely like in the short term as well too. So again, look at what are you saying is what have you not progressed on specifically? Is it all your lifts? Is it just one? Is it weight? Reps? What are you looking at there? I think that's the first thing we want to look at. So from there, all right, let's talk about things that are going to impact our performance. And again, this is going to be from a muscle building lens, but we can look at this through any other type of training that we're doing as well too, right? If we're doing cardio, if we're doing any other performance-based thing, again, why would your performance be down? So first, we got to look at hydration. I put hydration high on the list because I think this is an easy to overlook thing. And even small amounts of dehydration can impact your training performance, right? You feel fatigued quicker. Everything just feels a little bit tougher. So look at hydration. Again, if you're someone who maybe switched to morning workouts, maybe you just didn't have as much water as you typically do because you slept overnight, right? Next, we're going to look at exercise order. If we're looking at specific exercises that maybe haven't gone up, did you have to change up the order of that? Again, people don't realize how big of a role that could play, where if you did something first for a while and then you had to do it third, or maybe you do it first, but then the gym was busy and you had to do it third. Again, that's going to be something that's going to impact your performance in terms of the numbers that you can do. Look at your exercise order. Next, we want to look at the workout order for the week. So if you typically do it as the first workout of the week and now it's the second, again, that's going to impact your performance potentially. So again, you want to look at that in terms of when you do that exercise in your week or that workout in your week. Because again, if you do something the day before that you don't typically do, that's gonna impact it. Which machine you use. So a lot of times people, different lat pull downs are going to be a little bit different. Machines are going to be a little bit different. They have to go to a different gym, and on this leg press at their regular gym, they can do this amount of weight. Then they go to other one that's a different brand and they can't do as much. Again, it's not a one-to-one thing there. Even like barbells and weights you'd think would be one-to-one, but I feel like sometimes they can be off just a little bit, and that can impact your performance as well too, which brings up another one I'm going to go over in a little bit. Then we got to look at nutrition. Okay. So your pre-workout meal, is that different than what it was previously? So you need to like look at that, but also your energy balance. Have you been eating less than you typically have over the last couple of days? Are you eating a little bit more? So again, we want to look at nutrition in terms of nutrition before, but then also what we've done in the last couple of weeks. Stress. Again, this is one that people don't realize can play a big role. This can be stress in terms of, hey, the last couple of weeks you've had a ton going on. That's going to slowly impact it over time. But then also, even if you had something go on that day or the day before, that's going to impact your training and your performance the next day. And then even if you had something stressful come up right before, and stress being not necessarily, oh my gosh, I lost my job or my boss yelled at me, more stress of, hey, you had something mentally and cognitively demanding right before your workout. where you didn't before. Again, that's going to impact your training performance. Another one that I commonly see is, did you go too hard in your training cycle? So a lot of times people just think of it as a marathon. They tell you don't want to go 100% starting off in the marathon, right? You want to pace yourself so you can finish it. Same thing with your training cycle. Did you go guns a-blazing and you were at 0 RIR going to failure right away? I've seen that happen a lot, right? When people coach with me, it's like they want to maximize every rep as much as they can. And so they train super hard right away, when it's like, hey, there's nothing wrong with like pacing yourself here a little bit. We still want it to be challenging, but we don't want you to go 100%, because that is something that I've seen where people do that. And then they get into week 4 and 5 of their training cycle. And now they can't progress, but it's because you pushed yourself so hard right off the bat. This one probably should be higher, but sleep, again, if we don't get good sleep, that could be something that impacts you. I will say on this, though, I think if you have one night of poor sleep, I don't think it's necessarily going to really, I don't think it's going to impact your training as much as you think it would. Again, maybe it does. It depends on how bad the sleep was and what happened and what do you have to train that day, whether if it's like heavy squats or something like that. Again, maybe that's going to be something that's going to impact you a little bit more than, say, you have to go do a 45 minutes zone 2 type cardio session there, right? So again, I think what you do, how your sleep was, I think in the short term, one day of like poor sleep, probably not going to impact you very much. That's not, oh, hey, you should go skip the gym now because you didn't get good sleep. But I think once you start to get 2, 3, 4 nights or a little bit more inconsistent sleep over time, that's where you're going to start to see your performance there. So again, sleep is going to be a big thing. In the short term, it could impact it. I don't think it's going to be as big as you think, but it could, depending on how bad the sleep was. Again, if somebody that typically gets 8 hours, they get 6 hours, maybe you tossed and turned a little bit. That's a lot different than someone who had something crazy happen and they could only get 2 hours. So again, that is going to be something that's going to, it's what exactly happened in that sleep. So for my women, menstrual cycle, the week or 2 leading up to the bleed, usually is going to be, you're going to be a little bit more fatigued. Everything's going to feel a lot tougher. So again, that could be something that in the short term is going to impact your training performance there. Alcohol, if you had alcohol the day before, or if you maybe had a drink early that day or whatever it may be, again, that's going to be something that's going to impact your training performance. Rest times in between sets. If you're varying these and they're drastically different than what you do normally, that's going to impact your performance and what you can do. So we want to look at that. Your environment, the environment's going to be huge. If you're at a gym that's super busy, or again, there's people at home, or you're sick of training in a certain gym or whatever it may be, or again, you're in a different gym environment than what you typically are. Again, to me, that's going to lead to some performance. It can impact your performance, not necessarily going to lead to performance decrements, but it could impact your performance. And in technique, technique's another one. Again, if you've improved your technique, that is going to impact your training performance, right? Again, we definitely want to look at technique as well too, as something that if we alter that, it's better. Again, that may impact the number that you can do. We want to look at these things. I think it's first understanding that, hey, oh, you know what? I wasn't super hydrated. Okay, but you don't really necessarily need to make a change to anything. But if you do, you look through these things, you troubleshoot it. Oh, that could be a little bit better. That could be a little bit better. You do that for another week or 2, things start to get a little bit better, but you're still not really progressing. It could be time for like a reset week, or a change in your training program, or maybe you just need to take a couple of weeks to just dial back. That's where we would end up leading to here with this. So hopefully that gave you some insights into what can impact your performance on there. That's it for this episode. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. If you haven't yet, follow me on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. So if you have any questions on the podcast or any questions in general, you can ask me there, and I will come on here and answer them as well too. And then lastly, if you are wondering why your performance is down, or what's the right amount of protein for you, or how can we minimize joint stress and have a program that's going to help you build muscle at the same time, then my free 30-minute strategy calls for you. We can dive into all these things, get a good game plan for you moving forward, and then figure out how to make sure you can continue to move forward. So if you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. That's it for this episode, and I'll chat with you guys next time.